world of Aristotle is a world that works at the macro level. But he did not know about the micro level or the submicroscopic level. And it was very linear. And it's what fed and drove Western science for 2,000 years. The Aristotelian world still works in some things. But non-Aristotelian is when we sort things in terms of process, movement, change, flux, and non-things. And so it's systems thinking, and it's getting the excluded middle, and it's recognizing that the things can be both and simultaneity inside of a system structure. And Science and Sanity, the subtitle of Science and Sanity, is a non-Aristotelian, an introduction to non-Aristotelian systems and general semantics. And so this began one of the first non-Aristotelian approaches to Science and Sanity, and looking at things apart from the Aristotelian approach. So this is the reality structure and how we think about that.
I believe it's meta-NLP we talked.
I'm not sure. The Aristotelian model, like Newtonian physics, when you hit a cue ball, and you can measure a physics, the speed, how hard you hit it, its speed and its direction, and then you can figure out where the other ball is going to go pretty close. But you walk up, and so that's hitting a cue ball. But if you walk up, kick your dog, Newtonian physics falls apart there. That's an example of it between Aristotelian and non-Aristotelian. And our mind-body system is more non-Aristotelian. That's a big difference. But see, our whole educational system has been set up primarily on an Aristotelian model of cause and effect. So if you grew up in a dysfunctional family, you're going to be dysfunctional, period. That's where this deadly thinking comes from.
Isn't that believing in the permanency of cause and effect? I mean, because
Yeah.
there are cause and effects, but if you believe they're permanent and lasting, that's different than... No, you can't think with that Aristotelian logic very easily, but you need the other stuff too, also.
Yeah. The syllogisms of Aristotle and syllogistic reasoning was originally designed, from what I can tell from history, as a way of asking questions that will elicit from the responder how to elicit knowledge and information. It was a game that they invented. It was a parlor game. Syllogistic thinking. And when people took syllogisms and made that the way of thinking, and Aristotelian thinking, then it really limited thinking to where thinking can only occur in a certain way, and that's what's called formal logic.
I studied Aristotelian. I majored in philosophy and religion. My BA is majored in philosophy and religion, and I studied Aristotelian logic heavily. We were really indoctrinated in it.
So are lawyers.
Yeah.
I just don't know what syllogistic means.
A syllogism, so that you make a statement, all men are mortal. Socrates is all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. So that's syllogistic thinking.
That's Aristotelian logic.
And that's Aristotelian logic. And of course, all you can deduct from that is whatever's in that original statement. And there's plenty of examples, of really funny examples of starting with some statement and then syllogistically, and it's logical, but it may not be real.
It seems that the Aristotelian logic was very often to prove something, and the elicitation process was really leading the person rather than really discovering.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's very deductive in that sense.
Sounds like the syllogism word. I can't pronounce it real well. It sounds like basically the core of all that is just presuppositions. The initial set statement is a presupposition, it's a frame. Everything else is within that box.
The problem, the presuppositions don't work in a lot of areas. Yeah, that's the problem, yes.
If it's false, it comes from it.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Okay, move on. Communication channel.
We put this in the mental category because there are two ways that we communicate, verbally and non-verbally. Verbally, we use a digital form of communication, so that dog, the word dog, stands for a certain class of animals. And so it's the word, the language, the terms, the content of the message becomes very important. And the nonverbal includes all the analog expressions of breathing, posture, muzzle tone, just everything along that line. And when we communicate, some people, their meta program is they sort for what is said, whereas other people sort for how it is said.
Now think about that, and think about the old 55-38-7 model. Communication is 55% nonverbal, 38% tonal, 7% content. This meta program informs us of how that falls apart. Now, which type person will be higher on the nonverbal? The nonverbal. See, Ed.
Well, I tend to sort for congruent versus non-congruent in auditory. That is, if the words and the voice tone and the volume don't match, then I...
Okay, so you're going to be more on the nonverbal,
nonverbal.
Analog meta program.
In that's nonverbal.
Yeah.
And typically in the West, men, this tends to be one of those male-female things. Most men have a tendency to be more on the verbal channel, and women on the nonverbal, so that if he says, "No, I'm not angry," she says, "Oh," or if she says, "No, I'm not angry," he says, "Oh, okay," because he said so. And that's just a kind of a generalization with regard to that. But those people who hear that incongruency will be paying more attention to the nonverbal channel. And so here's another meta program of how we hear the world. And some people will hear that, and they will not hear that analog or that difference, that incongruity, or will not notice it because they're paying attention to the verbal channel. And other people will only pay attention to the nonverbal and will hardly hear the words and utilize that. But of course, they're both equally of value. They're both equally legitimate. And there's a long discussion in Structure Magic Volume 2 about this. And we can take each one and make it a meta message to the other. I can say everything I'm going to say right now. You really trust. This becomes meta to my words. Or then I can say, I just crossed my finger, and that normally in this culture that means I'm saying this and there's a trick going on. Now I'm saying words about that. So words can be meta to the nonverbal. The nonverbal can be meta to the verbal, and we can layer it in many layers. So neither is a meta message in and of itself. Both are para messages, and we can make each other meta to the other.
We go to the emotional sort now.
Or should we do another exercise?
I think let's do another exercise and break for lunch.
Okay, let's do another exercise and break for lunch.
Yeah, we'll do another exercise and break for lunch. Then we'll go to the emotional sorts after lunch.
Let's get in the same groups. Let somebody else be an experiencer and tell another positive story. Now we've got 12 meta programs to listen for and sort for. And so just 2 or 3 minutes of that and ask questions to elicit more and more information so as to hear meta programs. Same kind of setup as before, and we'll go about 15 minutes this time, a little bit longer, and give you more chance to do that. And then when you hear the whistle, that'll be the lunch, and we'll come back at 1:40. Yeah. This is one of the few meta programs that are very much oriented and driven and created by the neurological responses of our nervous system. So that people with a real sturdy, solid nervous system will be more aggressive, and those with a more sensitive nervous system will be more passive. It leads to the general arousal syndrome, what we call the fight-flight syndrome. And so when your nervous system is threatened, when you send messages of overload or threat to your body, do you go at or do you go away from? And we can see babies when they're born with real sturdy nervous systems. It's like even to feel they push their nervous systems they'll be banging their heads against a wall.
This is one of those that genetics plays a part in. But even with genetics, we can modulate it with mental level structures.
So as a child, the answer to this question will be, as a child, when you were threatened, did you go at, did you go away from? Did you go at, did you go away from? Aggressive means you're aggressing toward and going at, and passive means you're moving away from. These are not emotional-laden terms. They just mean going toward, going away from. And we'll have a natural tendency moving toward and away from. Assertive, none of us are born that way. We have to learn how to stay in the relaxation response so that we can have enough presence of mind to think rather than going at and then going away from, and then choose which one. Sometimes it's appropriate to aggress. Sometimes it's appropriate to move away from.
Which do you tend under stress? Be very passive or more toward the aggressive, or have you got it modulated where you can be assertive?
And we're all learning the assertive.
I do a lot of therapy on both ends of the spectrum. Passive who wants to be more assertive, aggressives who want it modulated from aggressiveness back down to assertiveness. You know, still on extremes, assertive is more in the middle.
So away from is the passive, and toward, in this sense, going at, is the aggressive, and it comes out of stress. And stress is the word that Hans Schley, the stress expert, invented or used from the use of bridges. And when this word was used at the turn of the 20th century, the word just meant the stresses and strains on a bridge. And so he took that word and talked about the stresses and strains on personality. And that when there's enough stress, there's enough strain, we get to an edge, and we will go at it and try to deal with it, or we'll go away from it because we feel threatened. So this shows up as the emotion of fear, and this shows up as the emotion of anger. And in that sense, anger and fear are the same. Neurobiologically and neurochemistry, they're the same. The difference is the cognition. I can take it. I can't take it. I just want to get away. So nervous systems have a tendency there, and to stay in the middle and to be able to think and then to choose which one to go from. That's what we mean by assertive. So it is a middle level structure that we learn. And going toward assertive kind of depends upon if you're moving toward or moving away from. So people who have a natural aggressive style, becoming assertive feels like becoming a wimp. Becoming assertive for a passive feels like getting aggressive, because you're moving in that direction.
Usually, this is usually not a one-session deal.
I have a question. I know that my tendency as a child was to go away from, and I do go away from something still as an adult. But other things I go more toward.
Okay.
It depends on the context.
Right. So the kind of stress and the stress as we define it, so that when you know an area and you can go toward it and you learn the skills of handling it, then we will have more of a tendency of going toward it, and so in that sense it's easier to go toward and deal with it because we know how to deal with it.
And so what part is inborn and what part isn't? I don't understand where that splits off.
There are naturally differences in nervous systems to where some are more easily activated. So think about what a nervous system would have to be to sit in the Indy 500 car driving 200 miles an hour. And what kind of a nervous system would you have to be able to handle that kind of stress? Or think about the nervous system of a hockey player or a boxer. The nervous system. There are, with dogs, with animal lab dogs, when we work with those who have a more sensitive nervous system can more easily be turned into, we create laboratory neurosis with them because they are more sensitive. They can pick up things much sooner. Whereas someone with a more sturdy nervous system, it may take a lot more for them to even feel. I went out for boxing when I was in college, and I got slapped a couple times really good, and I was like, that hurts.
Yeah.
I don't like that. I'll go run. I'll go learn to run and lift weights. Just don't hit me. But when some of the guys who were doing that, they get hit and hit, and it's like, doesn't that hurt? And it was like their nervous system, it wasn't even, well, not yet. You know, it takes a while for it to register. Well, my nervous system is more sensitive than that.
I read a study recently, I think it was last year, they were studying criminals and genetic. It would appear from this study that some people that they come in neurologically wired to be more aggressive or more passive, and the upbringing will determine with those who are wired to be more aggressive, where that aggressiveness comes out in criminality or assertiveness, where it's modulated. But that nervous system will always be, wired to really respond rapidly, like Michael's talking about. This is just recent. I think it was last year I read that.
And so then, how do you make that switch?
Meta levels.
Well, we can take into account our nervous system. I used to teach a lot of assertive communication courses. They were 10-week courses, and almost everybody who was attending them were passive in their emotional style. To get an aggressive to attend, it just seemed like, why would I do this? I can let people know. I can give them a piece of my mind. I don't let them.
Usually they'll come when they get in trouble with the law or they get fired from work. I've had a lot for that. Very aggressive nature, and they get fired. They have all kinds of problems at work.
And that's the confusion also. They think assertive means aggressive. But aggressive is a whole different thing from assertive. Asserting it, I assert, I just put it out on the table without being in your face. So the aggressive response is a power response. And a lot of people and it leads to the type A personality. This leads to the type B personality. We now say that the assertive leads to the type C personality, and the literature makes those distinctions.
We'll later get into severe categories, but kind of like the level or mode, that's kind of like an assertive. That can be very assertive. We just lay it out there. You level. Your yay is yay and your nay is nay. Now passive has difficulty doing that.
Now, several other things that come into this play is that if you're born aggressive and you're traumatized with it, you may flip over from the aggressive style over to the passive, and you're actually traumatized aggressive.
Passive.
No. The passive aggressive means I go passive until I get to my threshold, I can't stand it, then I aggress. But because a person is aggressing and that's not their style, they're outside their comfort zone, they don't like it, and when they get it all done and over with, they say, that's not like me. And I don't like myself that way. The passive-aggressive. Because each side will get to a threshold. When a passive gets to its threshold, that person will flip over to the aggressive because they're moving to that threshold, and then they pop passive-aggressive. And when we look at most of the mass murderers, like the person who climbed up to the tower there in Texas and shot everybody, and all the neighbors say, well, such a kind, quiet little person. Because they're not used to the anger, and so they build it up, and then explode.
I have an idea that guy that shot those people at LAX just recently was probably that way.
So the inability to be assertive, the inability just to let people know what they're thinking, feeling, and their emotions. Most passives don't like their anger. Most aggressives don't like their fears. They're afraid of their fears. And so an aggressor is the same way. When an aggressor gets to his or her threshold and just can't stand anymore, when they become passive, they flip all the way over there, and their passivity is very, very powerful. They're the ones who are more likely to commit suicide or do something desperate in that backing off, because it's out of their comfort zone. They don't know how to live with their fears. They're not used to being aware of that. The awareness of fear itself is so threatening to them. And it's out of their comfort zone. And when they pop over here because they're out of threshold, it's a wild kind of handling this fear. Whereas a passive is used to this. An aggressive is used to the anger and can turn it on at different degrees. When the passive flips over there, it is wild and out of control and uncontrollable. But when we become traumatized, an aggressor becomes traumatized and is living over here, it's out of their natural. Same thing with a passive who may have been walked on, and they get to the threshold and they never again. And they can be a traumatized aggressor or traumatized passive, and they're living over here aggressing, but it just doesn't fit. It's constantly out of proportion to the emotions that's going on. And so that can happen.
Working with divorced people, one of the things I always said, watch out if somebody's too nice.
Yeah, because we do feel frustration, stress, anger, and needing to express it when it's still small and manageable instead of letting it at threshold. There's a Bible character, old King David, the little boy who went out and fight the giant. And you think about little David when he grabs 5 stones to go ahead to kill the giant Goliath. I mean, this is an aggressive little kid. You know, everybody else is shaking their boots. He says, "Give me the stones," and out he goes. Well, he's going at it. Later on, when he becomes a king and he sees a woman bathing naked on Bathsheba, and he says, "Oh, bring her to me," and he sets it up to kill her husband. I mean, this guy is going at things. But apparently, when he got caught with that one, he became afraid of his aggression. He became afraid of going at things. And then, when his children started acting up, and one killed another one, and one plotted against him, he just sat on it. So a traumatized aggressor, trying to be passive, but being all out of proportion. So we can be traumatized each way with these energies of going away in stress. And that's what this meta program is dealing with.
Larry?
Yeah, both styles, they're still caught up in the arousal, the general arousal syndrome. But it's, I think, important to keep in mind the physiology of it. When you're in that, you may have heard that your body, your system pulls blood away from the feet and the hands,
right,
and centers it toward more in the
Well,
front.
it pulls away from brain and stomach.
Right, and what I was going to say, it pulls away from the cortex, which is where you have choice. You are at choice. You're operating from the brain stem, where you're not at choice. So one of the key ways to deal with it is practicing the relaxation response for moderating that.
Right.
You go back to choice.
Right. And so this becomes very, very appropriate if we're in physical danger, because we want blood withdrawn from brain and stomach, and we are thinking in survival black and white modes, and we're not thinking with finer discriminations when that occurs. And if it's physical danger, then it's probably very appropriate, because then we can flee or we can fight. But when the danger, the stress is psychological, a threat to our self-esteem, a threat to our dignity, a threat to our relationship, a threat to our finances, or it's overload. The two things will set off the whole brain nervous system to do this is threat or overload. And overload is like chronic stress. Just, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And we get to a place where the strain, I just can't take any more. And then we flip into the stress response, and it can become so habitual we don't even know we're there. But the blood pressure is all cranked up, and we're in stress overload, and may not be able to feel it. So the relaxation response is the ability to let things go on a regular basis, and to take away the tension of the muscles. The difference between stress, psychological, and tension is in the muscles. And stress is the psychology of what sends us into those states of threat.
Yeah. Carl, could you come up here this minute and let him read your T-shirt? Yeah, just stand up here. Look what he's got on his T-shirt. No, I will not fix your computer. I was looking at that.
Make sure they know your program up front.
A little aggressiveness there, just a little.
Or assertive.
Yep.
Asserting it. The difference between assertive and arrogance, asserting is I assert, I can do this, I can't do this. I assert, I want this, I don't want this. I assert, I feel this, I think this. So asserting is just setting it forth. Arrogating is when I set forth something that's not true. I'm arrogating something that's not true for me. And so the difference between assertive is just setting forth or leveling, and arrogating is the opposite when I'm asserting something that's not true. And aggression is when I take an emotional state and go at something And usually it's in the sense of an attack or a threat to another person rather than just asserting. So the simplest way to do assertive communication is, I think, I feel, I want. I'm thinking this, I'm feeling this, and here's what I want. What do you think and feel and want?
Power zone pattern is good for this. Genius, that power zone, own your own power zone. Yeah, good for assertive training. Ready to go to the next one? Referencing style. Extremely important. You waiting on me?
Mm-hmm.
No. How do you know when you what do you rely on for authority? Do you rely more on what other people think or say, or do you just know inside?
How do you know when you're doing a good job?
You have to hear from others, or do you know it yourself?
And so,
we're a person whose codependency dysfunctional, where will they tend to be?
Think about this in terms of where we're all born at. We're all born other-referent. And so to become self-referent or internally referent is an ongoing development and maturity. We're all born other-referent. In fact, we don't even know that we're different from mother. There's that symbiosis, and we slowly individuate. We slowly have that autonomy. And so other-referent is the natural one we start with, and self-referent is where we go to when we decide this is what I value, these are my visions, this is how I can know that I'm doing a good job.
For me, this is very context dependent. The other will depend on who the other is and how that other has behaved in the past.
So that's why we ask the question, how do you know you're doing a good job?
So you're giving me an internal check there.
I'm saying I'm basically internal.
You're internal as to whether or not you're going to accept what they have to say as having value to you. That's internal.
So if we ask the question, how do you know you're doing a good job learning this material?
Well, that's different from how do I know I'm doing a good job as a computer performance engineer.
How is it different?
It's different in that I know I'm doing a good job of learning. That's an internal. And how I'm doing, whether I'm doing a good job as a computer performance engineer, depends on, for example, whether the people on the computer in question notice an improvement in performance or not.
So you won't know that. So you won't know that you're doing a good job until they say so.
Right. In that particular case, but I know in this particular case, it's strictly internal.
Okay, but you really don't know that you've done a good job. You're pretty much clueless.
I know what I have done, but it doesn't.
Does it count?
The loop doesn't close until I know that the customer has seen an improvement.
Okay.
In that specific case.
And so the question we're asking is.
John.
The question we're asking is, how do you know that you've done a good job? So it's not the fact that we may want to go and find some external validation, but can you feel good about what you've done, or do you need someone to validate that for you before you can let it count?
In that context of doing that job for the customer, you still have to have positive feedback from them.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the context of learning, that's something I do all on my own.
That's internal. John?
I know I've done a good job by my own criteria, and it's unlikely that anyone could change that.
By my own criteria, which is?
Internal.
Yeah.
And I love to get strokes and approval for what I've done.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Now, this doesn't mean you don't like the external validation, but how do you know that you've done a good job?
It doesn't mean that you don't listen to feedback. This is not about feedback. Al?
People do tend to drift back and forth depending on, really context specific. You will find that teenagers will often be internal to their parents and external to their friends.
Right.
So we get that if your friends told you to go jump off a bridge, you'd do it. When you're arguing with somebody, you're both internal to each other because you're not putting any validity on what the other person's saying. And in a training, and when I work on a training, I want to make sure that as quickly as possible, as part of the rapport, I have an audience that's external to me rather than internal and judging everything I say.
So part of the words here on the screen is about your sense or your locus of control. Locus of control is a
Number 14.
is a psychological term, and we have all kinds of tests for locus of control. We have paper and pencil tests that can identify how much locus of control. Locus of control is kind of circle. Locus means circle, and the sense of control over whatever it is that we're discussing. And do you posit it inside or outside? And so the people who have less and less of a center of control, that is a power zone, the more that they'll posit that the locus of control, what really affects emotion, thought, mind, job, credibility, validity, whatever, is out there or inside. And so that's what we're talking about, locus of control.
A codependent type person will tend to have locus control on the other, and they'll be second position to the other.
I've often written stuff and give a first draft and say this is 80%. I think that this is 80% complete. I've spent 2 days on it, turned it in. How far do you want me to go with it? And that puts it back on them and gives me some flexibility.
Okay, so that sounds like internal
who's
self-referencing.
Okay, yeah. You gave it to Mike. I didn't see that. Okay.
So does everybody know where your meta program is for the most part? And the ability, once again, flexibility of consciousness so that I can shift and do other referencing. It's awful hard to be very empathetic, very caring, very concerned if we can't do other referencing, so we want to. And also, we lose a real sense of management over our own lives if we can't come back and do self-referencing. What do I think and feel and want? So in terms of becoming uninsultable, we'll do some other referencing to find out what's your complaint, what's your criticism, and we'll consider that. And then we choose for ourselves, from a self-referencing standpoint, do I buy it? Do I need to hear this? Is this important for me? How does it fit with my values, my identity, my visions? And so that breathing back and forth between self and other reference, and only when a person is at one extreme or the other will it become a driving meta program.
A question?
Michael, I'm wondering, is there a point in the training where you're going to do any tying any of these like meta programs to some of the conditions you laid out in your structured personality book? The different conditions that are plausible. Is there any mapping that you all intend to do, or are we trying to stay out of the mapping of those things to meta programs?
We can certainly talk about it. We don't. It's just given.
Okay, I'm just curious
the time limitations.
Thank you.
What we did in structured personality is to take some of the personality disordering that creates pathology and identify the meta programs that seems to be operating there. A lot of pathology is when a person is stuck in other referencing and is always referencing and needing lots of validation. Someone who never feels loved may have permeable self-constructs, the one we covered this morning, and is always doing other referencing and has a hard time to say, I'm loved, I acknowledge that, and from the center, the locus of my control, I'll do self-referencing and just move through the world as a lovable person. Also, someone who is stuck in self-referencing can develop the sociopathic personality to the only person who counts in the world is me. So that's the other extreme, and cannot get out and do some other referencing and develop what we call a conscience or a social awareness of other people.
There was an interesting study done on the number of people who were misdiagnosed and suffered the consequences in the medical system. And what they did was they did recent studies, and found that how long it took a doctor, after he'd asked a person what's wrong, to interrupt in a range was 15 to 45 seconds. So is that an other reference? I think so. I think not. I think it's a big self-reference.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm the expert.
And the other thing I was thinking about was if you have a boss who's very self-referenced and have people that are other referenced, you're cruising for some interesting results. So that's something that people need to be aware of as well.
Which one of these is the easiest to manage?
Other.
The other's like herding ducks.
Yeah. Tell them what to do and give them a little praise once in a while.
And so what is the personality structure in terms of meta programs for people who join a cult? The other referent. And whoever's in charge of it, whoever is the big guru who is the self-referent, everything references off of David Koresh, or everybody references off of Jim Jones, or everybody references off of Adolf Hitler, because that's the only eagle that counts. And so then everybody else is referencing.
We don't have any of that in NLP. Okay, emotional state. You waiting on me? Emotional state. On page 96, top page 97. You tend to live your life. Okay, best way to do this. Think about an event recently that gave you problem. Just recall it. Work situation, family situation, some event that gave you trouble. Just recall it. And once you recall it, check to see if you're associated or dissociated. When you recall it, did you automatically go there and associate it in your body, or did you just recall it and see yourself? How many saw themselves? You're dissociated. Okay, how many were associated? You were not in the picture. Most of this crowd is associated. That's your emotional response state. In that context. Most of these kind of people will, in any context that has pain and hurt in it, will tend to be consistent. Yeah. So, which would serve you best? Except for Linda. By the way, Linda, that was meta NLP training, wasn't it? I was going over associated, dissociated, and associated, dissociated. Generally, most people, to associate intensifies the emotion. To disassociate decreases the emotion, but not for her. And explain to them why. Yeah. Now here is a good example of not generalizing.
The exception.
This is the exception.
I am the exception.
You are an exceptional person, Linda.
Because if I am in it, then I don't see it all. And so part of it is hidden to me. If I'm not in it, then I have to view the entire scene. And I see it all. And so I have to experience it all.
I have to. There's another meta program operating there. I have to. But by her seeing the entire scene, including herself, she saw more content, more what was going on. And then with the meta program have to, she metastates her with all of that problem stuff, negative stuff. And it intensifies the feeling. That's how come don't ever generalize it. Everybody's this way.
And that's the most general statement we can make.
This is rare. This is rare. But I learned a long time ago in therapy, for some people, to associate does not increase the emotion. For most it does.
So if we work with Linda or someone like her, and we're working, we say, okay, just step out of this, and she has more emotion, we might want to check the meta program before we start thinking, well, the pattern doesn't work. So this is where a lot of researchers who really don't know NLP have done, and there have been some studies presented who have tried to do research on NLP, and so they'll take these general patterns, run it, find an exception, and therefore conclude pattern doesn't work. Good science.
Good science. those of you who associate any negative, try this. Recall a happy thing, a pleasant experience, a real pleasant one recently. And just get a picture of that and notice where you associate or dissociate. Is it different? Some of you is different? Yeah. Okay. Got a microphone back here. Hector?
So generally...
Jim went one of his famous things.
Generally speaking, associating on all of our positive ones allows us to use those as resources, and stepping out of the unpleasant ones allows us to have more resourcefulness with it, unless you certainly welcome in and just enjoy all your negative emotions. If that's your frame, then you're okay with the negatives. So I associate both positive and negative ones, and the negative ones don't put me in a negative state because I'm welcoming it, because that's my frame.
Curiously, when
need a little louder, Hector.
Yes, when you asked about how do we feel in a positive event, I was feeling like I was dissociated. Kind of trying to feel everything.
So when I ask you to recall a pleasant experience, you recall that you were disassociated, you saw yourself where you could see everything.
Yes.
You kind of applied limit strategy.
Just something, and that's quite strange. I just didn't realize that before.
Okay. That's where the meta level structures. Notice, association-dissociation is a so-called submodality. But it's also a meta program. Therefore, the term submodality itself is erroneous. It's not sub. Submodality is not sub to anything. They're meta-modalities. This one, for most people, this is a biggie. For most people, this meta program is critical. For a person who tends to associate always in their negative stuff and live there, that's a key component of depression. For most people. We'll get later on tomorrow with time sorts, and as I've mentioned before, a true fired recipe for depression: be past oriented, be worst case scenario, and go be there. Sort for the past, but only the bad things, and associate into it, unless you're a limit. And you can build a good case of depression just doing that.
The other question with associated-dissociated is how much flexibility, how much quickness can you step in and step out of anything? Think about the positive thing, and can you easily step out? Can you easily step in?
It's good. If you can, what I've done is, I recall the past. Literally, I step in. I used to recall stuff always associated, and by learning this, it's revolutionized my life really. And then, physically, I just step out. Myself. And for me, that diminishes the emotion immensely. And then I can challenge map territory. Hey, I was 5-year-old or I was 9-year-old. I don't live there anymore. And then that picture starts moving away just by talking to myself that way. I'd say 95% of people do not have to live their lives in depression. Just to get out of there. You don't live there anymore. Challenge the map territory distinction. Better than Prozac. Yeah.
Both of them I saw from first and third. So I'll see it from my own eyes, and then I do a sweep and see, say, myself and my wife, or myself and my daughter, see us both, and then I come back into first position.
Okay. What do you do first? As soon as the question's asked, which one do you go to first?
Say
in
what?
A painful emotion. In a painful emotion, which position do you go first?
When you asked me, I went 1 and then 3. And
so you associate it in the painful emotion, then immediately third position?
Yep.
Okay.
Look at the whole thing.
That's good. That's resourceful. Now, a person who lives their life disassociated, remains disassociated, and we call them objective people, the computer mentality, the Mr. Spock. But a person who lives extensively disassociated, we label them dissociative disorder, out of touch with reality. Right? We've had a lot in NLP about this. somatic response style.
This metaprogram refers to how we act out our thoughts, emotions, and choices, actively, inactively, or reactively. And so soma is body, and somatic response is just our natural tendency, whether we're inactive or active or reactive. So here's a continuum to active to reactive, and just kind of a semantic reaction without thinking. The active is thinking about it and then acting on it, and then the inactive is just thinking about it, and putting off action. And so different styles of response, and once again an emotional style.
Where did you get that from?
It's been in NLP.
Yeah.
It was one of the references.
It wasn't in my early training. Okay. Alan?
I had a question on that, Michael. A lot of time when I'm working with people and going through the meta programs, and I come to this one, what I found in a business sense a lot of times, maybe true in a personal too, if I have someone who tests about equal and active and inactive, a lot of times they just seem to loop. Have you found that? They don't go anywhere. Is that the inactive one?
Yeah, they're just thinking about...
yeah, they don't move. It's just like they seem to get stuck there.
Yeah.
Auditory is the loop.
It's definitely a loop.
Yeah, they may be thinking and feeling, but not hooking in the motor programs to actually take action.
Would reflective fit in here? Someone who would reflect before they would act or choose not to act?
So there'd be degrees of reflectiveness in the inactive and in the active. As the active is different from reactive in that it's unthinking, unreflective, whereas active is reflective and thinking and then taking action. And inactive may be caught up in that reflective loop and just reflecting and then reflecting upon the reflections. And so, yes, reflective is in there.
The next one, again, this is extremely important. We have two parts to it, A and B. This is our conventional sort. Two basic ones. First one you're very familiar with. You have to see it to be convinced. You have to hear it. You have to feel it. You know, which is your primary rep system for being convinced. Of course, very important in selling.
What it is, I mean...
It can be very context dependent.
Okay, we have a John here.
So when you think about buying a car, let's just play with that one for a moment. When you think about buying a car, what convinces you?
That's primarily kinesthetic.
Okay.
John?
Well, I was just thinking, how many times do you have to see here?
Okay, that's the next part. That's coming up.
That'll come next.
Yeah. This is, most I'm sure very familiar with it. Okay, let's go to the repetition convention.
Well, before we do that, most of the time your convincer sort will be the same as your representational system favorite. So if you're visual, what will convince you more is what it looks like, and if you're auditory, then what it sounds like. So what convinces you that a person is trustworthy? So, and does that fit with your primary representational system? You got to feel them first.
Okay, ready to move on? How many times does someone have to demonstrate competence to you before you believe they're competent? The question I ask is, how many times will you have to experience that this old behavior is gone before you know and believe that it's gone? And if they say 3 times, how many times will I future pace them? Yeah, Omar.
Well, I was thinking about the competency of somebody. Well, in my case, I mean, we have to check it out, because I am thinking that always. I mean, if somebody is good at in NLP, for example, I have to see the person always doing the...
You have to constantly see them doing a good job.
So this is the first one, never convinced.
That's that right there. Oh. Yeah, I married a person like you. My wife is all over the meta program. Okay, Pascal.
I was looking at that, thinking about my son driving a car. He's learning and we're teaching him. And you missed one up there about the period of time. So I'm thinking, it's going to take me a while to be convinced, but the period of time, not each time you go driving.
Yeah, that's another we could put. Convinced. There is a category called period of time for a certain length of time.
Yeah.
It's in the book, though.
It's in the book, yes.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
So how many here are never convinced, like Omar, never convinced?
So I have to keep convincing Kimberly that I know what I'm talking about.
So never. When we were in Australia, we had, I think, 7 or 8 people who raised their hand that are never convinced, because this is part of the scientific mindset. Never convinced, because there could always be the exception, and because you're always kind of waiting for, well, when will it not work? Then you're never convinced. Now this is where flexibility of consciousness becomes really important, because think about what you're missing if you never allow yourself to go into the state of convinced. And to go into the state of convinced doesn't mean that you won't open it up and look at and welcome in exceptions to the case later on when that occurs. But when you miss that, then you miss out that ability to absolutely and to give yourself a chance to feel convinced, to act convinced, and to move through the world, and to give someone the chance to be convinced about them. So we do have a pattern for changing that particular meta program from never convinced to where you can put little frames and context around the things along that line, because especially personal things. Because a lot of times, if you're never convinced that you're skilled now at teaching NLP or skilled now at teaching neurosemantics, then it's like, well, I'm not convinced yet. But if you have a never convincer, then you're in that double bind. You'll never be convinced. And so flexibility there will really improve the quality of your life, so that you can start. And this is also where putting it in the continuum. To what extent are you convinced? Are you 90% convinced? And what if we run with 90 or 80% convinced? A lot of times I'll start off on a new project and I'm only 20% convinced that I can pull this off. And we call that taking a risk. But when it's all the way up, it's got to be 99.9% convinced before I'm going to start. Then it's like you're just waiting. One more book, one more work training, one more workshop before I start, and it creates some misery that way. The opposite end of that is when you're always convinced. Bob mentioned this morning. When you're
problem I had early on.
Just mention the subject. I'm convinced.
Yeah. Automatic convincer. Buy on the spot. Buyer's remorse will modulate. Larry. Yeah, your name's Larry.
In the case of competence, I thought, well, it's really kind of context dependent. It wouldn't be a matter of repetition. It would be, in different, say, environments or different situations. But then we weren't talking about competence. We were talking about being convinced. But I think I apply that to whatever. I don't like to get locked up in convinced. What does
that mean? You don't like to get locked up in convinced?
I don't want to be rigid about it. Like if I trust somebody, I'm convinced that they're competent in some area where I need to trust them, but I still should keep my eyes open.
You still keep your eyes open? Someone else raised their hand. Pastor. Oh, okay.
I was looking at 17A, and in the context of semi-major business decisions, I would class what we do, there are analytical procedures, I would class that as Word, like decision matrices and things like that. But then where does that fit on the B side? That I think once you get through the analytical procedure, there's no time lag, there's no repetition, there's no automatic convince. So you have to do the process to get there, and there's no never convince.
You have to do the process, and how many times you need to do it before you know it worked?
Once.
That's a number of times.
Okay, so that would
be one time would be a number of times.
That would be word one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Think about being convinced about buying a house or some major item. Most of the time, we have a lot of the criteria coming in. It needs to look right, but even more important, it needs to sound right. or even more important, may need to feel right. But then it needs to meet all this other criteria within budget, not going to put me in strain financially, in the kind of neighborhood I want, near the schools I want, the quality of life, so so how many times do we have to go through seeing, does it really meet this criteria? Does it really meet that criteria? So you have to go look at it again. You have to go talk to somebody else again. You have to go to this again. And so how many times are you convinced? Would you ever buy a house sight unseen? So it's interesting that some people, the Stan is shaking his, he would.
I have.
That you have. So the visual must not be all that important. There must be other criteria, and it may be fitting other kinds of things. And then how long does it take you to make those kinds of decisions? But this is where what convinces you, and how often I have to go through this. So oftentimes we'll go back to the same store to look at it again, think about it again, talk to somebody again, or it'll be a period of time. And then it feels like, I'm getting convinced. I'm almost there. Just need a little bit more, and I'll be convinced. And this is that strategy and that process of becoming convinced with something.
What pattern do you use to, if someone is never convinced, move them off that a little?
The best language pattern is, you and I both know that you'll never be convinced. So the only way to find out if this is really for you is take a chance, try it on. Here's a money-back guarantee, so no chance of really loss. So since you'll never be convinced, might as well go ahead and get started. And it paces.
Notice he paced. You and I both know you will never be convinced. So you're pacing it. So you go ahead and try it. Money-back guarantee, nothing to lose. But we know you'll never be convinced.
One interesting application that I found for that method program is for entrepreneurs. People that wants to start a business, something like that. And sometimes, if we think about entrepreneurship as one of the strongest ways to a country or a community to grow up, it can be pretty useful for a person that is thinking about doing businesses. Just to find out what is the meta program that is kind of preventing from that person to do business.
This is critical in selling and motivating. Very important.
My buying strategy for things over $50, it gets worse. So when it gets above 1,000, is that I have to look at it and check it out many times. I don't even have a count.
In describing that, he gave us another meta program we're going to get to later. Go ahead, Jim.
So, for example, I need a new computer because both of my major computers in my house are at the point of having some mechanical problems. And so I've set some criteria, and what I'm doing is waiting for the price to come down to the point where I can meet those criteria for under a certain price.
And he just gave me another meta program.
And I will keep shopping until it reaches that point. Now the risk is that there's a new feature that comes out that I consider important before the criteria is reached, which means I can take sometimes a year to buy a new product, which drives my wife crazy.
And the salespeople.
The salespeople, they walk away.
Okay. What about a 10-minute break?
Okay.
Yes, about time.
Dock your face.
Some of these are on reading people and using meta programs and just noticing how we filter things and process things. Here's Linus, Charlie Brown, and Lucy. She says, if you use your imagination, you can see lots of things in the cloud formations. What do you think you see, Linus? And he says, well, those clouds up there remind me of the map of the British Honduras on the Caribbean. He says, and that cloud over there looks a little like the profile of Thomas Eakins, the famous painter and sculptor. And that group of clouds over there gives me the impression of the stoning of Stephen. I can see the Apostle Paul standing there to one side. She says, that's very good. What do you think you see in the clouds, Charlie Brown? Well, I was going to say I saw a ducky and a horsey, but I changed my mind. We use our meta programs to process things. Here's Charlie Brown. He says, ask your mom if she'd let me rake one of her leaves. And I said, one? I have a whole yard full of leaves. Well, I'm kind of new at this. Why don't we start out with one and see how that goes? What's the meta program? Details. Details. Maybe procedure. We haven't got to procedure, but maybe procedure because it's just one at a time, these details. Here's Lucy and Charlie Brown. She says, sit down, please. She says, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer me truthfully. You see, philosophers can learn a lot about a patient by asking what may sound like a very simple question. She says, right now, you answer me truthfully. Which do you prefer, a sunrise or a sunset? Charlie Brown says, well, a sunset, I guess. She says, I thought so. You're the type. I might have known. What a disappointment. People who prefer sunsets are dreamers. They always give up. They always look back instead of forward. I just might have known that you weren't a sunrise people. She says, sunrisers are go-getters. They have ambition and drive. Give me a person who's a sunrise person every time. Yes, sir. Sorry, Charlie Brown. If you prefer sunsets to sunrises, I can't help you. You're hopeless. He says, actually, I was sort of preferred noon. So what is Lucy's meta programs that she's demonstrating here? And meta programs? Black or white? Either or? She sets them up for some things. So there's some other programs going on here. But the either or program really shows up strongly in that one. Charlie Brown says, she said she'd write to me every day, but I haven't heard a word. Linus says, maybe to her it was just another summer romance. She's probably found another boyfriend by now. Charlie Brown is burying his head in his hand. Worst case scenario. Worst case scenario. So there's that meta program. I like this one here.
Yeah.
Damned if you do, and damned if you don't. Come on. Pick one or the other. Charlie Brown and Lucy. Binoculars, huh? She says, can you see into the future with them? Charlie Brown says, of course not. What good are binoculars if you can't see into the future? So what's the meta program going here? Possibility? We will get to some of the modal operators in a little bit, and possibility or have to. Yeah, here's a black and white, but just one or the other. And she's doing a lot of concrete thinking instead of continuum thinking or non-Aristotelian. It's very Aristotelian, this or that, as she goes through this process. Violet says, how's the birdhouse coming along, Charlie Brown? He says, well, I'm a lousy carpenter, can't nail straight, can't saw straight, I always split the wood. I'm nervous, I lack confidence, I'm stupid, I have poor taste, and absolutely no sense of design. So, all things considered, it's coming along okay. What are the meta programs here? Optimist rather than pessimist. We will look at self-confidence and some of the qualities of self-confidence in a little bit. Here, Charlie Brown and Lucy is again. I have never seen the sky as blue as it is today, Charlie Brown says. Lucy says, oh, I have. I remember back on July 14th, 1959, the sky was real blue. Oh, yes, that was much bluer than today. And she says, and then I also remember September 2nd, 1961, the sky was very deep blue. And on June 1st of the very next year, the sky was. So what's her meta programs here? Sorting for difference would be one. Details would be another. Mismatching, so that's sorting for differences. One of the interesting things about Schultz in creating these characters, they're consistent, just frame after frame, year after year, the consistency of the meta programs that they demonstrate, which then gives them a consistent personality. Bob?
I'll just clean glass. Trying to get my filters cleaned up. Ready for an exercise? Hello. Oh, hello.
Just a quick thing. We're on number 18 out of 51, and I'm starting to think that I'm sick in the head because I have each of these in my head somewhere, and there's still so many to go.
What we'd like to do is page 114, do an exercise. Michael, go ahead and describe this. It's a good exercise you came up with. You want me to do it? Okay. If submodalities are really metamodalities, and if so-called submodalities can function as metaprograms like associated, dissociated, then we should be able to do some shifting with the submodalities as well as meta levels. So just want you to experiment a little bit and get you a partner, and as it says, this is on page 114 again. Think of one of your top 10 NLP states. Get one of those states. Find one of those states and get the submodalities of it. Notice the submodalities and get the state really refreshed. And then you want to check for the metaprograms. And in your book on number 2 it says use the metaprogram list, page 70. That's an error. That should be 90 or 90 to 91. Yeah. So look at especially the metaprograms we've covered, and as you get in that state, you notice the submodalities, and your partner will be helping you. Find out what metaprograms are active within that state, and then shift back and forth. Number 2 at the bottom, shift back and forth between the metaprograms, noticing how it affects your submodalities. As you get a metaprogram, say one of your metaprograms is as you look on page 91, say you're more sensing. You're got your sensory awareness, really. You're really focused outward and paying attention to specific details sensorially. Then go intuition and see what happens. Because when you switch, when you go from one metaprogram to another in a state, notice what that does to the submodalities. If you switch from being a number of times convencer to an automatic convencer, see if that changes anything. Or if you go from being more passive to being more aggressive, see what that does. Or whatever, determined by the metaprograms that you have activated. These metaprograms will be solidifying the state. So, and notice the submodalities. Then when you switch metaprograms, notice how it changes submodalities. And vice versa. You can shift submodalities and see if that will work. But primarily, be playing around with changing metaprograms. We were talking during the break with some people about changing metaprograms. One of the first things to do is give yourself permission to do it and to try on other metaprograms. So this is also an exercise in trying on other metaprograms. And number 3, solidify your learnings. As you shift to more resourceful states, check for ecology as you future pace. Then you can, if you get your state really souped up and more impactful metaprograms that serves you better, then bring beliefs and values to bear on that, and anything that will solidify it to make it even stronger. Does that need more? Okay, I've got a question here. Tony.
It's only fair.
This group's been together too long. It's like turning your back on Michael this morning. That was good. I like that.
I was just going to be ornery.
I might have to dismiss you again. Yeah. So get in state, get the submodalities. Partner will help you from the list. Start playing around with find the metaprograms. Play around with switching those metaprograms. See what it does to the submodalities. Find metaprograms. If metaprogram does not serve it well, find one that will, and then start layering it with, well, I believe this, and this is more important than the other one. And so this is a game of experimentation. Okay? Groups of 2. We're going to need some time on this. 10, 15 minutes. 10 minutes each.
We went with passive to assertive, and noticed that associated and dissociated was important there. And when we tried to change it, for me, going from assertive to passive to bring passivity up to assertive, I noticed that with assertiveness, it was more panoramic and associated. And when I went to go combine the two, that the assertiveness did not want to go to the location where the passiveness was represented. So it was like I dissociated and like, I want up here, it's all right. So it was kind of interesting. Fun.
Yes, that's great.
Associated for assertiveness.
Yeah. Anyone else? What kind of meta programs? What were the meta programs?
So there are meta programs that run our states, and when you change the meta programs, then the state itself starts altering and changing and becoming different. And so we need the right meta programs for the right kind of resourceful states.
What kind of meta programs did you identify? Someone else? Was they Luis? Yeah, okay. Microphone.
There was a difference in submodalities as you changed the meta programs.
When you switched to meta programs, the submodalities did shift.
It did shift. But I was wondering if you could, instead of chunking down the programs, which are more than 18, to label it in, let's say, 3 that can change, can make big difference. So to not have it so much.
So you're talking about discovering those key meta programs that just switching one of them or 2 of them will make a major shift, or be a driver meta program.
Or make 3 global meta programs.
Yeah, it just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. That there are these different ways of processing and sorting and filtering information, and so there are at least these 50 and maybe more.
You know, someone said they're like this. There's so many. I bet it was Kimberly. She said there's so many. That's the way it works. But now some of them can make, some of them like their driver submodalities that you can change will change others. Some of your states will have key meta programs. You can switch one, like the one you were switching made a big shift. You'll find that.
So by definition, if you're in a good resourceful state, you'll be associated. And when you change the meta program to dissociated, it'll reduce the state, it'll change the state. It won't be the same. That'll be fairly significant. If you're in a state of joy and you notice which meta program, options or procedures, or matching or mismatching, then that may change it.
Or like you go global and see what's the canopy I'm operating from.
Go globally and see what I'm repeating. Go globally and see what the canopy.
That canopy that may affect changes in all.
Could do.
7 or 10.
Yes, if you find a driver one, it'll do that. Just like someone else should.
I think what's so intriguing to me is that the distinctions remain the same or are universal through any language. Whatever language we speak, we're going to move toward or away from. Okay. We're going to sort globally. Mm-hmm. That's fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. Common to the Homo sapiens sapien.
Yes.
How do we tie risk into meta programs? Is there a mapping for it already? Are we going to talk about it? Or
yeah, and we will have a couple that will be coming up that will kind of address the subject of risk, as well as different states.
To me, I'm responding to trying to reduce them. To me, the more you have, the more distinctions you have, the more you can figure out. Okay. The more you can figure out about people and how they function.
Okay, let's. We ready to move on to number 18? Michael's going to cover 18 and 19.
We're in the process of looking at the emotional meta-states, those associated, dissociated, and toward and away from in terms of aggressive, passive. Now we have number 18. This relates to the focus and diffusion of emotions, the emotional style in which we emote. We can emote in a unidirectional way or multi-directional way. This tends to be another one of those male-female differences. And it makes a lot of sense. Multi-directional emoting, if you're responsible for dealing with children, you may be multi-tracking. Therefore, you'll have emotions about this and emotions about that, and then emotions about this other task, and emotions about work and career. And so you may be, and so when you have a feeling, you may have a feeling that is multi-directional. So the feeling can start spreading in many different directions about many different things. Whereas unidirectional emoting is if I'm upset or stressed about work, then it's upset and stressed by work, and then when I go and do a hobby or play or recreation, I'm fine. Or when I go home about relationship. But multi-directional is if my work is not going well, it bleeds over to home and relationship, it bleeds over to hobby, it bleeds over to emotions everywhere else. So it's multi-directional versus unidirectional.
Pervasive, remember that? Yeah. We let our emotions pervade everything, other context in our life.
So multi versus unidirectional focus of the emotion. So when someone is emoting, one of the first questions we want to ask is, what is this feeling about? And of course, if they say, well, it's about everything, then they may have the meta program of multi-directionalizing their emotions and spreading it. So we say, well, what set it off? Well, it might be about relationships, it might be about work, it may be about health, it may be about something else. And when did that happen? Where did that happen? And how is it that this affects relationships? How does this affect business? How does this affect these other things? And so sometimes an emotion will come in and it'll spread, and so that's more multi-directional, whereas the other one is keeping it contained. With positive emotions, it's better to use the meta program of multi-directional. So if you get a positive emotional state about one thing, then start spreading it. But some people keep that contained, and it's like they keep their joy, their resourcefulness, or their confidence contained, and it doesn't spread. Whereas if it's negative, keeping it contained in a unidirectional way, so it doesn't spread. So emotions can spread. Emotions can be contagious with different facets of our own life and facets of emotion. So how do you typically handle an emotion? If something goes wrong in one area of life, does that tend to start spreading to each and every other area of life? Or does it keep contained? When something goes really great, does that spread to every facet of life, or does that keep contained? And so the containing or the spreading of emotions.
A key thing in success, living a very productive, successful life, is to be able to let it be about what it's about when there's negative stuff, not letting it pervade other areas of your life and not personalize it. And that's where this comes in big time.
Emotional intensity. This is how much emotional exuberance or lack of exuberance do you have when you emote. When you emote, is there a lot of energy and surgency and exuberance to that emotion? Or is there dissurgency, that is lack of intensity, lack of exuberance? So surgency, one experiences emotions with lots of intensity, very strongly, feels it throughout the body, and of course once it's overdone it can lead to hysteria, whereas the opposite is just leading in the different direction and not wanting to show much emotion. So how much expressiveness is there in emoting versus non-expressiveness? So this is surgency, dissurgency. So when you emote, how much surgency? Most children, if you watch children, are very surgent. When they cry, they cry. When they throw a tantrum, they throw a tantrum. When they're laughing, they laugh. And so a lot of surgencies. And then there's lots of then there's lots of things that can dampen that. A lot of cultural frames that we're not allowed to be that surgeon. So we learn to contain and control ourselves, and we can do that we can just not be very expressive at all in terms of showing our emotions. So showing our emotions has to do with permission to show emotions, acceptance of that, gender roles that permit that, or cultural roles that permit that, and different places and times.
Yeah, and this would be a good example of how I was saying some of them seem like they're twisted amongst each other, meta programs. Because this one I would have a tendency to not show a lot because I'm not really, even though something is supposed to be positive or good, I really don't know, so I'm not going to show too much. And this is where a lot of them get twisted.
So when you feel a good, strong, positive emotion, do you experience it with a lot of intensity and exuberance? And to what degree? And how much more exuberant could you be? Or how contained is it in the sense of trying to hold it within and contain it and not be very expressive? How expressive are you? Or non-expressive? So that's what this meta program deals with.
I remember taking my sister to the first Beatle concert in Toronto, and talk about surgency, screaming girls, you could not hear a thing. It was just like out of control.
Okay. So when we see someone in an emotional state, in some sense we don't know how, is that low level for them? Is that high level? Is that at the top for them? Because if we assume that there's some kind of a normalcy there, we'll be imposing some kind of a rating, a gauging thing, so that some people, when they're really emoting, if they're that's top of the line. So it depends upon the emotional intensity. And then some people, they're all over the place, and you say, so you're really feeling emotional? No, not really. This is just, I haven't turned loose at all.
It also occurred to me that perhaps kind of the group dynamic can affect this particular one. And I think those of us that were partying hardy last week might relate to that one. Alan?
We don't have a clue what you're talking about. That's a clue.
And now we're ready to move to the choosing willing.
So before we move into the choosing or the coordination meta programs, one of the homework assignments that I think would be a lot of fun for you to do this evening and bring tomorrow morning, go to the newspaper, and whether you go to the editorial section, whether you go to just a description of a story, or go to the classify ads, especially men and women looking for other men and women.
Yeah, that's good.
And look for meta programs.
Yeah. If you're single, please go to the...
It can be a real riot.
It is. It's funny. We did that in Sydney. Michael had them do it in Sydney. That was a lot of fun.
And there are several papers. I don't know if they're here in this particular building, but around some of the places you'll see just little newspapers just for people looking for people. And just in 3 lines, you can and so one of the tasks we'll do tomorrow, somebody in Sydney with one classified ad of some gal looking for a guy found 26 meta programs.
It was unbelievable. He could have taught us, I think. He did a fantastic job.
And so that'll be a lot of fun looking for that. It also teaches us to be able to sort for and identify meta programs. And now we've gone through all the mental ones and the emotional ones, and we're starting in the coordination ones. But if you'll grab a newspaper and just highlight how many meta programs you can find in one line, whether it's in the editorial or something, because our meta programs are always being manifested, because it's how we process information. And if we step back and look at how did this person process this information, then we can start identifying that. So if you'll do that, we'll identify some of the best ones tomorrow and let you report
We'll do
on
that first thing in the morning. A lot of fun. Okay.
Is it fair to get the comics?
You can do it with the comics. I mean, we're doing it here with Peanuts.
Yeah.
So even looking at the comics and seeing if you can find one that shows a lot of different meta programs.
You can't find a newspaper, just anything written, or if you're watching the news or television or something. Okay.
Motivation direction is very similar to aggressive passive, but that had to do with stress. That had to do with threat and danger. This is just our direction of moving through the world toward or away from.
Well, the way to elicit this, the best way is just to listen to the person. When what do you want when you're in a relationship? What do you want? And then listen to the person's comments, and inside those comments, you will find out that just someone take the mic and let me ask you, someone, especially a single person. A single person here? Oh, yeah, I'll play with them. I'll play with them. Okay, now I'm going to ask her that question. And so, Linda, you tell us what's important to you about a relationship. And then you tell me which one she's more away from or toward.
What's more important? It's important that the person is a Christian, primarily.
Okay.
It's important that they're single.
I know where that came from.
It's important that, well, I can give you all the original ones, that they're kind and sensitive and caring and they listen.
So maybe instead of asking the question, what's important, asking, what do you want?
What do you want?
I want someone who will be a soulmate, a partner, someone to walk through life together. I don't want to cook and clean and do all that. I want a partner.
A partner. But then she said, I don't want to cook and clean.
I'm getting into that. I'll tell you what I don't want.
Yeah. You notice that, and lots of times you think it's a toward, but behind it will be an away from. Okay, keep talking. What else do you want?
I want someone who can think deeply and converse.
Think and converse.
Talk equally.
Talk equally.
Someone who likes to go out and have fun, who's just carefree, who's sensitive, not overly. We've had enough of that.
Now, what was that?
Had enough of that.
Yeah. Okay, that's good enough. So, what did you hear mostly? Did you hear mostly away from or towards? Yeah, mostly towards. Yeah, but there was some of both in there. Okay, Jim.
Is there a more neutral way you could have framed the question? Because you asked her, what do you want?
What do you want?
Yeah, so she started talking to you about what she wants.
Yeah.
Is there a neutral way to frame that question?
So if we ask the question, when you think about buying a new car, what's on your mind about buying a new car? When you think about entering a new relationship, what's on your mind? Tell me about your ideas there. So that would be
toward, away from, are values. By definition, are values. So away from can be kind of more negative. Again, you've got to watch. Lots of things you'll take as positive has behind them away from. You can question a little bit more deeper and find out. Like Linda said, she wants someone who's sensitive. And then you said what?
But not too much.
Not overly sensitive. What's that about?
Because I have enough of that. I don't need somebody.
See there? Now there's the away from. I have enough of that. Now, okay. Okay, great. Now, these are values and extremely important in communicating with a person and motivating them. If you talk to someone, if you're selling them a product, and most of the reason, well, I don't want a car that'll break down every 10,000 miles, you know. I don't want a car buy from someone where I can't get service. So how would you sell to that person? Same language. Same language. These are values, and you match them.
It's got to go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. And again, toward away from the propulsion system type thing. Okay, moving on.
This is called adaptation style, and it's how we adapt to the world, whether we adapt by finding a procedure that allows us to step-by-step get to something, or whether we look for choices and options and how to invent a series of ways of getting to the same thing. So options, procedures, probably a meta program that will be pervasive in most of the things we do. So when you go about your learning style and want to learn something new, what's your preferred style of learning? Would you like to know how to do it step by step in a procedure that will lead you to that outcome, or would you like to use a number of different options and have different choices about how to do that? What feels best and most appropriate for you? When we want to do one of these patterns, do you want to know what's step one, what's step two, what's the best procedure that someone has developed, or would you like to just kind of explore it and find out how you could use it and maybe come up with some new procedures?
How many people are more procedural? Okay. Options? You love this guy.
$1 for the training.
About this, I find that I'm very options-oriented, but I'll never get anything done unless I have some overriding procedures. If I'm modeling someone, I'll have a template. There's something you have to go back to, some major steps that are in the bigger picture. You may go up and change them, but you need something in the procedures.
Kevin or Ed? Okay.
This is another one that, in terms of context, when we want to model, modeling really does call forth a procedure. When we want to do other things like access a state, some people will need a procedure, but some people just, I've got many options, many different ways of doing that, and it just kind of depends on how I feel at this moment of how I want to do that. So some things don't need a procedure as much, although sometimes when you know a lot of options and you're going to go in the kitchen and start cooking, and you've cooked a lot, you've gone through a number of different recipes, and now you're ready to just kind of play with it and just throw some things in, because you know the field well enough that it's time to just make a lot of choices.
Why did you get into NLP, Alan?
Options.
Just give us reasons and tell me there's more options or procedures. Here's where you can ask a why question, by the way.
Well, what I wanted to do was to find out how I worked and how other people worked, and why I did things I did, why I didn't do other things.
Why is that important to you?
Because I need to understand. I need to understand how people are wired. It's very important to me, and how I'm wired, and how better to interact with people.
Still need some more information.
And so
what I wanted to do was to be all that when I interact with people, I like to have a choice in the way I interact with
that's
people.
word. Choice, like to have choice is.
So when you start interacting with somebody, how do you decide what to do, what pattern to use?
Well, it depends on my outcome, for one thing. What is my outcome? My outcome in different situations will be different.
So if your outcome is to help them to get a well-formed outcome, then how do you go about that?
Then I'm going to give them a procedure. And that's what I was going to say when I got into this. The easiest way to identify a procedure, when someone asks me how, they're asking me for a procedure. When they ask me why, they're asking me for options.
Most of the time,
yeah. So that'll be...
Most of it.
And the interesting thing is, if you have a high choice person who goes into overwhelm, you need to give them a procedure to get out of the overwhelm.
Yeah.
Reduce their options.
How many people need to always have options open? Yeah. And if somebody says, we have no other choice, what does that do to you?
Go looking for another one.
Yeah, that might fry an options brain when you say, no other choice. Don't like that. Okay.
Or more than one way to do it.
Who said that?
Ed. Who?
Larry Wall, the guy who invented the Pearl language.
He said what?
There's more than one way to do it.
There's more than one way to do it.
There's always more than one way to do it.
So option people are very good at inventing new procedures. And they may follow it a time or two, and then they want to find another way to do it. And keep changing them. And then procedure people are excellent at following a procedure and really using it and becoming very skilled and masterful at using that procedure and developing some real expertise with it. And of course, once again, flexibility of consciousness, having that choice back and forth and doing that becomes another facet of mastery.
Ready to move? Tight. Yeah. Adaptation sort. Judger, perceiver. How do you like to live your life? Spontaneously, or do you want to control everything? In the middle. Yeah. This is one of the Myers-Briggs ones, by the way. Myers-Briggs, judger, perceiver. Yeah. On top page 100. Do you like to live life spontaneously as the Spirit moves you or according to a plan? Now this ties into the through time, end time. A through time person will be judger or more perceiver. Judger. Yeah. A judger wants to be in control of everything. So we judgers, we got everything out there where we can see it, control it. We also like closure. A perceiver views the world as a whole and something to mostly observe, notice, and experience. In time. In it. Perceivers in it. More associated in time. We judgers tend to disassociate where we can see everything and we can manipulate all the knobs, including you. Sometimes we live in frustration because some folks don't like to be manipulated. High judger has control issues. Been there, done that.
So the more the first one is trying to adapt the world to us, and the second one is I'm quite willing to adapt myself to whatever's going on and adapting myself to the world.
What would it be if you like to have a plan, but then you can be spontaneous within the plan? Balance?
That's going back to the other one. Yeah. So you're
when you have a plan and a set of procedures for what to do and how something will work, then that plan is going to be really doing something that makes the world adapt to us, because we get a plan for what to do, and inside there we can then be more spontaneous and maybe have options inside there. So there are different kinds of interfaces with these meta programs.
You take a procedural judger. We like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we like closure. Everything in order. See, I fit into. This is, by the way, I think I shared it with Meta NLP. I don't think I did with this group. I scored on the Myers-Briggs in 1991, I believe it was. I scored a 45 on the judger. That's almost off the scale. Yeah, that's sick. And later on, as I realized how I was living my life, I made a willful choice in a training that I was going to stop that. And then in 1996, I took it again and made a 15 on the judger. So I come from a 45 to 15, consciously working on it. They can change, and that was a biggie for me. And my wife said she couldn't believe how much I had changed. And the major area of change was from being less judging and more perceiving, less controlling and more stopping and smelling the roses.
So where would you put yourself on this scale between adapting the world to you, adapting yourself to the world, between judging or perceiving as your style of adaptation?
Where would you be?
Okay, so it may be context dependent, and there may be no particular style of how you do it. My style is much more toward the perceiving end, just observing and going with the flow.
Us judgers we love calendars and to-do lists and that kind of things. We can control that. We can control the camera.
Then you can perceive you're controlling.
Perceive you're controlling. Yeah.
You can control your perceiving.
Yeah. Very close to in time, through time, these two are.
So that if each of these come from metastates, then that's what we're doing right now. If I have a state of taking charge and controlling, and take control of my perceiving, or take control of my controlling, or perceive my controlling, and so the interface of a metaprogram. Same thing with options procedures. Sometimes to go into the state of procedures and have a procedure for choosing my options, or having options about when to choose my procedures. And so
you're doing some rewiring. You're doing good. I'm watching smoke come out people's ears. Yeah. Control your need to control.
When she said about planning and the options inside, it is about what you do. So there's a plan, what I'm willing to do, but the options, that's more black and white and continuum, because that's mental, what I think about.
Options is having many choices, or having a sense that there's alternatives. I don't have to do it this way.
Is it about thinking or doing?
Well, both. Yeah. So how many ways can we run the swish pattern? Well, the procedure person think, well, there's a right way to, there's a procedure for the swish, and the options person thinking, well, how many more ways can I run the swish pattern, and what alternatives do I have? I was telling somebody the other day about a number. I think we came up with 15 or 16 ways to run the swish pattern, and to do it not only visually but auditorily and kinesthetically. And with my daughter Jessica, one day we were playing at the swimming pool. I had a home in town that had a swimming pool, and so she was on the diving board, and she was a little bit scared. And I said, well, see the you for whom diving is no problem. See that you, and just see that you going into the water, and just see that you just sitting there, or just on the board. So she did, and then she fell into the water, splashing it and entering into that you. So a kinesthetic swish pattern.
I noticed a lot of times when I was in the corporate world, what I would see would be very procedural people. They would have a systems person come up to show them how to use certain software. And they say, well, how do I do this? And they go, well, you can do this, or you can do this, or you can do this. And it would completely drive the person nuts. You tell me how to do it. One way, that's all they want.
Yeah.
It's very common.
I know this stuff may find use somewhere. Perhaps. Yeah.
And if not, we'll come up with another procedure.
Yeah.
Or an option.
Hey, Tony?
I guess I'm misunderstanding here. Judger would be a scheduling person who likes to have a plan, and then perceiving would be similar to options, or could
this
you not
is
have
close
a plan?
to the previous meta program of options procedures. This is different, though. This is adapting the world to me. So being very involved in making things happen. So it's much more the Western mindset, where the Eastern mindset is much more just noticing and observing and moving through. So that's the difference here, whether I adapt to the world or I get the world to adapt to me.
This is more closer to in time, through time, I think, than any of the others. Again, they overlap. See,
This is very contextual, isn't it?
all of them are. All of them are.
This one seems more so.
Well, it just depends upon what meta program you have.
When I was a 45, it was everywhere. In all contexts. Boy, it was sick. Real sick.
And yet, I think it's still important to remember that none of this is real.
Reese says, none of it is real. We're so serious.
It's all make-believe.
Well, it's not real out there, but of course it is real in here. And however we programmed it, becomes our own reality. So it's as real as, and most of these meta programs you have to be one way or the other. You have to, because most of them are just describing ways of processing, and along a continuum, you're either adapting to the world or the world's adapting to you. So, or you're somewhere in between. So in terms of a software, the programs cannot run unless you're looking for a procedure or you're looking for options or some degree in between. That we have to do. We have to use this filter. No, it's not Aristotelian. It's the fact that the brain has to have these kinds of things to function. That's why we don't have a choice about not having meta programs. When we're born, we may not have them, but it doesn't take long for you start running your brain, and you'll run one of these programs with regard to things.
And that's a key to determining whether a thought pattern is a meta program or is not. Does it function as a filter in all people?
And so now we're going back to the structural question. This is the structure of how it works. So either you're processing globally or in details or somewhere in between. We really don't have a choice, because to process information, it's either a big picture or it's a detail or somewhere in between.
And you could be from South Africa, Indonesia, or North Carolina hillbilly. You will be using these programs.
And then each one will lead to certain behaviors and feelings and emotions and our sense of our personality. So it will work, and then asking what does it work for, when does it work best, when does it not work so well, and having that flexibility consciousness to choose our meta programs. And so for me, it is a choice to go to the adapter mode, the judger mode. To go there is harder. So when I'm with someone and talking, it's easy for me to just listen and just to notice what's going on and to perceive, and I don't feel any particular need to intervene. Whereas for other people, it's harder for them to keep listening because they're thinking about all the things they can do.
Control.
My question for you then is, how do you know if I understand it right, and part of neurosemantics is starting with the end in mind, are you not then, if you're just perceiving and floating along and going along with what they say, are you not then moving toward a direction? Are you not then having a well-formed outcome to aim for?
I usually don't in my personal life. I have a sense of direction.
So it's contextual then?
It is contextual, but I have enough flexibility now so that I can do that, but that does not feel the most natural thing.
Oh, okay.
One of the questions I get as much as anything, especially from trainers, is how can you just sit there and listen and let them talk and sometimes just give them lots of space and not say anything? Well, I was like, no trouble. I don't need to change them. And yet sometimes that is very powerful, letting a person just say and speak, and sometimes waiting and then they say something else. And so that's the easiest style for me, rather than jumping in and making something happen. And we all have our styles, our meta programs that we come from.
But yet running the pattern assumes that you're going to a different direction, that you have an end in mind. Different, change.
Right. So like this adaptation style, how do you adapt yourself to the world? Do you try to make the world adapt to you, or do you try to adapt to the world? Well, my style is much more, I'm going to adapt to it, and as I adapt to it, I'll just nudge it gently to move in the direction I want to go, but mostly I'm adapting to it.
Oh, so we're not trying to make a difference in the world.
It's a different It's a different way of going. It's a different way of going about it.
It's a less stressful. It's a less stressful way.
I agree with you.
Yeah, been there, done that. I've been on the trash heap of burnout.
So as an adapter, as someone who does the perceiving, you'll hear me say things that are more true to floaters and perceivers. That is, we'll invent it as we go.
You need to stand up and take a stretch.
I don't know where it's going, but it's going in the right direction, and we can keep nudging a little bit here without having a specific, an agenda, because I don't know who we're going to meet. I don't know who's going to come in. There's more things I don't know than I do know, and I'm quite willing just to kind of adapt to it as we go. So that's my style. And that tells you more about my meta program than I wanted to let you know.
Let me make a statement, and I go down. I used to have the metaphor, time is short, make it count, and a high judger, and I end up burned out. The older I get, and I just turned 58 in May, the older I get, which means the less time I have actually to institute change, the more a perceiver I become.
Yet it was still the goal to make change.
Oh, sure.
I find judgers use the word should a lot in reference to other people.
Mm-hmm.
They should do this. They should do that.
And motor operators are next. Yeah. Let's take 10 minutes.